Alright, well I guess this will have to do. Got my notes over here to the side. I had my camera in a different orientation, and I guess for a live view have to have the camera in this orientation, so I had to change it all around. Sorry about that wait. I realize there's nobody on here watching right now, but I figure at some point somebody will probably watch this, so I didn't want to just not say anything about that. Anyway, excuse me. Sorry for any background noise. My kids are here. My daughter's napping. My son is watching cars and playing with cars in the living room, so hopefully that won't be too loud or noisy. But anyway, recently I've been getting a lot of questions about sourdough starter, and I do intend to do a video on it specifically. But in the meantime, I figured I would actually just get on here live and just show you and answer the questions that I've gotten so far, which I have written down right here. As well as, hold on one sec. Anyway, I figured I would answer those questions as well as any that come up if anybody does join this live. I've never done a live before, so this is completely new for me. Sorry for any hiccups that happen. And I don't even know if this is something that I can make public. It's a little unclear. It says when you make a live that it automatically defaults to private, but I don't know if that means that I can't make it public. But if I can make it public, I will, so that people can watch the replay if they want. And I'll include timestamps so you don't have to watch all of that beginning stuff. Anyway, so I'm gonna go ahead and feed my starter right now and just kind of talk about what I'm doing and why I'm doing it and answer the questions that I've gotten. So one of the questions that I got was about, what if there is liquid on top of your starter? This starter just came out of my fridge. The jar is kind of got some condensation on it because it's warm out here, and it just came out of my cold fridge. So I wanted to actually show you what it looks like, because mine has, as you can see, there's like separation happening right here, and there is a fair amount of liquid on top of mine, which I don't know if I can show you without like dumping it out. But anyway, it's pretty normal for that sort of thing to happen, especially if you are storing it in the fridge. It's nothing to worry about. It's not going to hurt you. It's not going to hurt anything. Sometimes it can even be a really dark color. If you've gone a long time without feeding your starter, it could be like almost black. And you can certainly just pour that liquid off the top and then just go ahead and give your starter a stir, take some out and feed it like normal, and it should perk right back up. If it's, you know, not like a funky color or funky smell, I mean, anything fermented has a little bit of a funky smell because it's fermented. So, but there's a difference between like a fermented smell and like an off smell. So there's a difference between something that's fermented and is good to eat and something that's like rotten and is not good to eat. One of the number one things to look out for actually would just be mold. So if there is mold on your starter, like on the actual starter, that one probably has to go. If you know more about starter than I do and you want to tell somebody how they can save it from mold, say that in the comments, I guess, but I don't know any way to save a starter if it actually has mold on it. Now, if there's mold somewhere on the jar but not on the starter itself, you can totally get some of that starter out and just move it to a different jar. That's fine. Anyway, so if it's like mine was today, where it's just kind of separated and there's some liquid that's on the top, you can actually just stir it back in. You can dump it off if you really, really want to, but it's fine just to stir it right back in, which is what I'm going to do right now. So now that I've given it a stir, let's come right back together, and you can see it's like really kind of goopy. I'm just trying to show you the consistency of it because I had some questions about that. So this is, like I said, it's right out of the fridge, so I have not fed this starter yet. I just took it out of the fridge and give it a good stir. And the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of the discard out. So the discard is really just the terminology that's used to describe the part that you take out before you feed it. It doesn't mean that you have to throw it away. There's nothing wrong with discard. Discard is what you use to cook with. So sometimes you want to cook with a fed starter, and sometimes you can cook with a discard. And the only difference is really the leavening power of it. And to be honest, I have done plenty of recipes that call for a fed starter, and I just didn't have a fed starter, so I just pulled it out of my fridge and used what I had, and the recipes have turned out fine. Sourdough is really, really forgiving. So the reason why you have to discard some of it is, if, as you can see, there is a fair amount in my jar, and if I was to feed this amount, I would need that much flour. If you have been following along a little bit with me, you may have heard me talk about how I don't really use ratios. So I'm just taking some discard out. I don't bother with the ratios when it comes to feeding my starter. What I do is I know a couple of things. First off, most recipes are going to call for about a half a cup to a cup of starter. So it doesn't take much to actually make that volume. I keep a lot more on hand because I like to make all sorts of things with my starter. I make crackers and pancakes and breads and desserts and all sorts of things. But if you're just baking a loaf of bread once a week, you don't need to have as much starter in your jar as what I had. So on to the feeding of it, and I'm sorry if this goes all over the place. Like I said, I'm new to doing a live, so bear with me. I will get better at this, I promise. So when I feed my starter, I come at it from there. How am I trying to say this? I know the consistency that I'm looking for, and that's important. So the consistency you are looking for is something, you know, kind of thick like this, right? And then when it comes to feeding, what I do is I just eyeball it. So the amount of starter that I have, my rule of thumb for myself is really just to eyeball the amount of flour that looks equal to that amount of starter to me, and then do the same thing with water and stir it all up and then add flour or water as I need to until I get to the consistency that I'm after. I err on the side of overfeeding rather than underfeeding. So, excuse me. So when I estimate how much to put in here, I am going to put in there, you know, probably a little bit more than what I think I actually need. So I wanted to talk about, another question I got was, what is the best flour to use to feed your starter? And are there any flours that you shouldn't use? And other people may have different opinions about this, but my opinion is the best flour to feed your starter is the one you can afford. And just buy the best quality flour that you can afford. I have used expensive flours, organic flours, and I have used store brand, you know, all-purpose flours. And I have never ever had a problem with any starter I've ever had, you know, dying or not working well based on that. Other people may have a different experience, but that's been my experience, is that it's been really, really forgiving. That said, you do want to buy the highest quality flour that you can afford. And then there's the question, you know, do you do an all-purpose flour, or do you do a whole wheat flour, or do you do a mixture of both? And the answer to that is going to be that, once again, you do what is sustainable for you. So if you can only afford to buy one type of flour, then you just use that one type of flour. If you can add some whole wheat flour into it from time to time, that's going to help it overall stay really nice and healthy and strong. But it's, once again, it's not really necessary. I've gone through times where all I had was all-purpose flour, and my starter did just fine. I do, however, like to use a 50-50 blend of flour. So I made this blend, and it is by weight, half all-purpose flour and half whole wheat flour. And I do like to feed my starter this when I have it. So that's what I'm going to use today. And I'm just going to kind of eyeball it. So I've got just this little bit of starter in here, and I'm gonna add some flour right on top. Another thing that people ask is, you know, about water. And for water, I do highly recommend that you use some sort of filtered water. And I haven't had a starter that's picky about it. What I have noticed is that if I use tap water that is chlorinated, then it has, it didn't outright kill my starter, but my starter was certainly suffering, and I did have to switch to a different water. And so you're just going to add in a bit of water. Just give it a good stir. And it doesn't matter too much if there's some clumps in there, because the cultures in the sourdough starter are going to, they're going to really break it down, and they're going to eat through everything. So don't worry about getting out all the lumps or anything like that. You want to give it a vigorous stir though, because you do want to get it nice and oxygenated and so it be nice and happy. And what I'm generally aiming for is a consistency I've described as being like thick pancake batter. And somebody asked me, well, what does that look like? And this is what that looks like. Let's see if I can hold this and kind of show this consistency. Okay. And that right there is basically it. I try to stay really laid back with it and not get too up in my head about it. I feel like the practice of using a traditional starter wouldn't have survived if it was as complicated as people will lead you to believe. Let's see, what is another thing that I wanted to cover? Oh yeah, so basically don't use tap water. Well water usually is fine, distilled water, reverse osmosis. I've heard, it's fine. The important thing is flour and water, and don't, use chlorinated water because, this is alive. This thing is living. Some people are also confused about what type of utensils to use with a sourdough starter and with cultured foods generally. So there are a lot of cultured foods that you don't want to use metal utensils with, but you can use stainless steel with sourdough. I have never had an issue with it. I do like to use wood for like my spoons and stuff, but that's just a personal preference and really has nothing to do with having a sourdough starter specifically. How to keep it. So I keep mine in the fridge, except for when I'm going to bake. So I guess the next part of that question would be, when do you take it out and feed it so that you can bake with it? So for me, I do a lot of batch cooking, and so I tend to take mine out the morning that I'm going to use it. And the reason why is because I usually have a fair amount in there from the last time I fed it, and I do that on purpose because I know that there are discard recipes I'm going to be making on the day that I feed it. So the first thing I do is I pull out that discard, and then I feed it, and then I just go ahead and I give it a few hours. I've used it as soon as just like 4 hours, but just kind of watch it because it'll rise just like any bread product. And some people like to put like a little mark or something on their jar so that they can see how much it rises. And it's normal for it to rise and then fall. Don't worry about that. That doesn't have any bearing on whether or not it's going to produce good products for you. Yes, so generally I take it out in the morning, I feed it, or I take the discard out, I feed it, I wait a few hours, I let it feed, and then oftentimes I'll make my whatever recipe I'm making. Some people have a rule where it's like you have to feed it 3 times before you can make a loaf of bread or something like that, and I have literally never done that since I was a very, very beginner sourdough person, and that's what everyone said to do, and so that's what I did. But I have found that that's not necessary at all. I've used starter straight out of the fridge and had no problem having breads and bread products rise, and then I've used it as a fed starter and had no problem. So I know I keep saying this, but sourdough is actually quite forgiving and it's really quite easy to work with. So once I'm done using it for the day, so I've fed it and then I've taken out what I'm going to use to bake, like maybe a bread or something. And then what I do is I will feed it again and then immediately just put it back in the fridge. And then I don't worry about it or think about it until the next time I'm going to bake. I generally bake about once a week though. So if you're going to be going longer than once a week, you might have to take yours out and feed it just once a week, which you would do the same thing. Just take some discard out, feed it, put it back in the fridge. Easy peasy. So you might have to do that if you are baking less than once a week. There's also a really cool video that you can find I have a sourdough playlist where I have a bunch of videos from other YouTubers who know a lot more about sourdough than I do. I'm kind of like an intermediate type of person when it comes to my experience and knowledge with sourdough. I wouldn't say I'm an expert by any means, but I'm also not a beginner, so I guess that makes me intermediate. And anyway, there's a really good video that I put in there where I believe it was Our Gabled Home, and Anya shows like a German method of keeping your sourdough starter, and that method seems perfect for somebody who doesn't bake often and wants to just keep a very small amount. So definitely check that out if you're interested. I've never tried her method, but it looks pretty fascinating, and I've seen other people have really good results with it. There's questions about, you know, can you keep a sourdough starter in a cold house? And absolutely yes, because you can keep a sourdough starter in your fridge, because that's what I do. So you might just find that your breads take longer to rise, or you need to find a warmer spot to put them in. And there's a lot of ways you can go about that. Make a nice cozy environment, you know, put it up on top of your refrigerator, or up on top of like a dryer, or maybe even on top of the stove. Some people turn their oven light on and stick it inside the oven. I have what is that? Like a toaster oven type thing. And I just get that a little bit warm, and you could stick it in there, but you don't want to accidentally kill your starter. So you don't want to put it, like, sometimes people will put it in the oven and then they forget about it, and then they go to preheat their oven and they kill their starter, so don't do that. And speaking of accidentally killing your starter, if you have a sourdough starter and you haven't dehydrated some of it and set it aside, you should probably do that, just in case, because you never know. You never know what's going to happen. So yeah, there's absolutely no issue with keeping a sourdough starter in a colder house. It just means that you might have to wait longer to use it, and you might have to wait longer for your bread products to rise. There's always like a time frame given on recipes where it's like, let something rise for, you know, 4 to 12 hours or something, right? But if you've let it rise and, you know, and it's just coming up really, really slow, and you get to like the 8-hour mark, and maybe the recipe said let it rise for 8 hours, and you get to the 8-hour mark and it's barely changed, well, don't bake it. Wait longer. Just put it in a warmer spot and wait a little bit longer, because it will rise. It just needs more time. That is on the basis that your starter is healthy and functioning, which the only problem might be a brand new starter if you're capturing one out of the air, and maybe it doesn't have enough yeast and bacteria and culture in it to leaven your bread. And in that case, you just keep feeding it and it'll get stronger, and you'll get there. And in the meantime, do discard recipes. That way you're not wasting, because I know that can be a big deterrent if somebody thinks that they have to throw the discard away. Like, you don't have to throw the discard away. When you're first starting to capture a sourdough starter, like the cultures out of the air, every day when you feed it and you're discarding, like, most people don't use that, and the reason why is just because it's not really strong enough to do anything with. But in my experience, there's nothing wrong with it. It's not going to hurt you. It's not going to make you sick. I've never wasted it. I've always just used it. I've always just thrown it in something. Let's see, I think that was pretty much everything from the notes that I had. I hope that all made sense. And before I turn this off, I will see if I can get a better shot of what this looks like. So bear with me while I move things around, because when you cook in a small kitchen, you just have to get used to moving things around a lot. That's just part of it. Sorry for the moving camera. Okay. So hopefully this is better. And on that note, thank you so much for joining me for my first ever live and all of the hiccups that come along with it. And now I can't get my tripod to move. And and all of the hiccups that come along with it, as I have more hiccups. Oh my goodness. Well, okay. I guess that's that. I'll have to figure that out later. So on that note, thanks so much for joining me, and I hope this was helpful. There will be a more polished video coming that will cover things a little more succinctly in each of the categories, but I didn't want to leave people hanging, and I really wanted to just get in there and just show you guys what I do. So I hope that was helpful, and I hope to see you on the next live and maybe see more of your beautiful little faces. I mean, I guess I don't really see you, you just see me. So see more of your beautiful little like profile pictures and typey words. That would be cool. Okay. And if you are seeing this and you are not subscribed, please subscribe, please like it. I'm on a mission to get monetized this year, and every little like and subscribe helps. Thanks so much. Bye. Happy sourdoughing!